Okay. Good morning, everyone. Maybe we can start. Welcome on behalf of the Artificial Intelligence in Management AIM Institute. The Institute is a brand new venture from EMLYON Business School dedicated to looking at the impact of artificial intelligence and robotics and blockchain on value creation, but also work organization of companies and governance of companies. We have different actions around research, pedagogy, dissemination. But today, we will be talking about research and value creation. So I won't be long. I just really want to welcome you to be part here, to be very present and proactive in this discussion. Don't hesitate to ask questions. We have 2 hours dedicated to that. So welcome again, and I will hand it to Margarita.
Risky, too risky.
I'll forward it for you.
Okay, I spend just 2 words. So welcome to this second seminar of the seminar series in value creation. So I spend 2 words briefly introducing the seminar series for our guest. The seminar series as the mission is part of the activity of the Research Center on AI in Value Creation, one of the 2 research centers inside the AIM Institute. And the goal of the seminar series is to stimulate the debate from the research side and also the practice, so the managerial implication, to combine theory and practice. Because we found that AI is impacting companies. First of all, this is the goal of our study. So the only way to improve the research is also to open up the debate with companies and to listen to best practice, the issue, the managerial implication. That's the philosophy behind the seminar series. We had in January the first seminar with Christine Balaguet on the challenge of responsible AI, more focused on ethics, the ethics of the algorithm, the ethics of artificial intelligence in practice. This is the second seminar, and we have the honor, a big honor, to have with us Professor Christopher TUCCI from EPFL in Lausanne. Christopher TUCCI is also part of the scientific committee of the AIM Institute. So the AIM Institute is a larger institute, as Renaud said before, and so our activities monitored and benefit from the input from the scientific committee members. And Christopher TUCCI is one of them, so this means very important person. And the goal of his presentation is he will focus his presentation on the crowds, IoT, and AI business model. Of course, for this topic, which are very cutting edge, I could say, topics, we have not answered. I mean, maybe some best practice. We are studying this. That is the goal of the Research Center. So the goal of his presentation is to open up the research area for PhD students, for professors, but also for MBA, to identify the state of the art of the research, which are the results of what the scholars are studying in this field. Just after his speech, we have the role of discussant. So it's not a guest from the company, it's a discussant. And we have with us Laurent Bianchini, Vice President Connected Services in Volvo, Renault Truck. And he's working daily on connected services in transforming products, working in ecosystem, Internet of Things. So the role, what we expect from the discussant is to highlight the managerial implication coming out from your speech. And I show you also the second slide because... okay, thanks. Oh, perfect. So here you see the two speakers of today. So thank you very much, first of all, Christopher, for coming, for honoring us to have you as a speaker. Yeah, and I leave the ground to you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'm just going to try and load my presentation here if I can. Patience. Go. The moment of truth. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation, and It's really nice to be here today, to visit Lyon. It's my first time on the campus here. It's very impressive, and I've been on a little tour this morning. Thank you very much for that too. And we saw some of the different maker spaces and the library, learning center hub, and everything else. So it was a very exciting day. And I want to talk to you a little bit today about crowds and Internet of Things, AI. I kind of it's kind of tried to make it so I hope it will be slightly interesting to people in both academia and in industry. So, and I'm just going to walk through these different ideas here and maybe end up talking a little bit about different business models that I've seen and that I'm looking at these days, and maybe give you a little some little snippets of information about some of the research that I've done over time here. Just to give you a little bit of background about myself. I've been a professor at EPFL, which is in Lausanne, Switzerland, not that far from here. Actually, I asked the driver this morning, I said, so what is it, like 3 or 4 hours from here? Because I took the train once from here to Lausanne. It took 4 hours. He goes, no, it takes an hour and a half by car. So it's actually very close. I've been there since 2003, where I have the chair in corporate strategy and innovation. And then I'm right now on sabbatical in London at Imperial College, and I'm in the Imperial College Business School as a professor of innovation. And then I was just finishing a little stint in China, in Shanghai, as a visiting thought leader at SEABS, which is one of the bigger business schools in China. I just last year finished a little dean job as dean of my little college of management, which I did for 5 years, and now that's why I'm on sabbatical now. And before that, I was at NYU. Before that, I did my PhD at MIT in technological innovation management. And then before that, I was actually doing computer science research. And so in the computer science research, what I was working on actually at the time was internet protocols. So I actually worked on IP, TCP, and other related protocols for connecting to a network. And then I spent actually several years working in the AI area, in the first AI bubble, working on evidential reasoning. So putting together pieces of information and trying to make decisions. So it's something that's actually continuing on to this day, as we'll see in a few minutes in this third wave. I'm not going to go through a long speech about what I'm working on, but just to give you a little taste of what I'm working on. I thought this is a very interesting case. I won't go detail on it, but this idea of how Chinese telecom company could block Skype in China, and using technology from a U.S. startup to block it. So I think that there's a lot of interesting things going on in there, and a lot of different facets to this. And so it kind of breaks down nicely into what I'm interested in, which is open innovation, digital strategy of entrants and incumbents, technological entry, creative destruction from technological change, business models and business model innovation. So it's kind of a little overview, and I won't waste your time by talking a little bit more about. I won't go through this in detail, but just to say that I've been open innovation, been very interested in corporate venture capital and how companies work with small companies, social networks, corporate hackathons. Talked a little bit about that this morning. I'll mention that again later. Lately, my latest paper right now is this one with Hank Chesbrough on the link between open innovation and lean startup. Can you apply all the lean startup principles inside a big company? And so we basically argue, no, you can't. Or which of those might be useful and which of those might be less useful. Digital strategy. I've been, of course, since I told you I was working on internet back in the day, so I've been very interested in digital strategy, my whole career somehow. So I've been doing a lot of things on. I'll talk a little bit about some of these papers today, just very briefly touch on them, and just to say that my latest one that I'm working on is this one here on. I don't know if this will work. Oh yeah, great. Open innovation and digitalization with Gianvito Lanzola and Danilo Pesce. So we just submitted that to a journal, to a special issue. Okay, technological entry. Basically, thinking about the new order of things and how like for example the internet as a creative destroyer kind of papers. I also worked a little bit on some macro papers on IP and growth and macroeconomic growth and in intellectual property and the relation between innovation and macro growth. And then finally, business models, which as you know, it's kind of if you can see these little definitions here, it's kind of description of how companies create value, capture value, and deliver value. So that's the basic idea. And then in that area, I've been doing a lot of stuff on that recently, and including a literature review with Lorenzo Massa and with Alan Afua in Academy of Management Annals, which came out last year. And this year just got one in Technovation here with Daniele Baglieri and Francesco Baldi on technology transfer office business model. So trying to basically say that technology transfer offices aren't all the same, that they have different, that they could be considered different business models. We did kind of a little data analysis of the US universities and their outputs and try and describe like 4 archetype business models for tech transfer office. So it's not all about licensing revenue, which a lot of people say, oh, that's the primary reason that a technology transfer office exists. And then we basically in there say, well, that's only one of the 4 reasons that it might exist, and you could have different ways of running it. So that's the basic idea there. Okay, now to get to the talk today. I'd like to propose that information technology can be used different ways in innovation. One of them, it could be used like to create innovation. So that would be like your groupware, Slack, type things like that. I'm not going to really talk about that today. So I'm really going to focus more on the second one here, which is you have new technology out there, and how do you think about adopting it into your product, service, business model portfolio. So that's the basic idea here. Digital business. You think about digital business, what does it mean? Here's some definitions of digital business, which is basically about the blurring of the line between the digital world and the analog world. It's not about necessarily replacing, and I think that's something else we should think about somehow. It's not about replacing everything in the analog world with the digital world. It's about somehow having some kind of competitive advantage from a combination of both. Okay, so here's a little agenda for today. I'm just going to kind of go through this one little step at a time. I don't know if it's a logical sequence. I hope it's logical in my own head. I am not sure that it's will seem logical to you. But basically the idea is, let's talk about generating data. And since I'm a big fan of crowdsourcing and crowds, I'd like to think about that first. And then talk about Internet of Things, maybe spend a few minutes on business models and business model innovation, just definitional type things. And then AI in business. And then I will talk a little bit about developing a data-driven strategy, but I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on that per se. There might be some interesting little points in there I'm going to touch on. And then very last but not least, the challenges of business model reconfiguration. So what are some of the problems in adopting, in a big company, some kind of new business model? Okay, so that's the basic plan. Does that sound good? You can stop me anytime you want. If you don't understand my funny accent, you can tell me to slow down, or you can make a and you can ask a question anytime you like. Otherwise I'll just plow through for an hour. Of course, I'd rather have a discussion with you and take questions than necessarily see all 172 of my slides. So. So just feel free to, actually I don't really have 172 slides, but just feel free to stop me whenever you want. Okay, here's this, I just want to start with this little diagram. I was kind of searching around on the internet a while ago because people kept asking me, what's the distinction between Industry 4.0 and the Internet of Things? And crowdsourcing, how does that fit in? So basically I was trying to find, so I found some interesting picture, and I adapted it a little bit to understand the sources of data here. So this is what I'm going to talk about. So if you think about it here, now the upper part of this slide is about fully automated real-time data flow somehow. And the bottom of it is one-off sending of information. And then if you look at the left versus the right-hand side, the left side is really about producers. So it's really about manufacturing companies and more company-oriented. And the right-hand side over here is more about consumers. Okay, so that's generally how these things are laid out on the slide. So if you think about it, the Internet of Things is all about sensors. So it's really about using sensor data, and then how that affects your company. You can think of lots of different ways that you can use sensor data. Okay, Industry 4.0 has a big overlap because that's all about industrial automation. So a lot of automating processes, of course, necessarily rely on sensor data somehow. but not everything. So that's why I have a couple examples here, like human resource management. Imagine you have a company and you say, I want people inside the company to be able to transfer jobs. You know, you could make it easy for them to search online, to have maybe some kind of matching online. It doesn't necessarily involve any kind of sensor data. Same thing with credit card transactions, right? Credit card, well, it depends. You consider the point of sale at a, is that a sensor or not? Fine. But if, depending on how you think about that, you might say credit card fraud processing, which I'll talk about later, is kind of an automation, but not necessarily a sensor type issue. And if you look on the right-hand side here, it's with the crowdsourcing, which is much more oriented toward consumers and consumer devices, et cetera, where that's where you're getting people to do some work for you, let's just say, online. And there might be some kind of overlap with the Internet of Things, which I'm going to talk about later, which is, you can combine sensor data and crowd data. And I'll give us some examples of this. Okay, so that's the basic idea here. And if you think about this innovation processes, the way I would like to think about it is there's lots of different ways that you can organize and use crowds and data for your innovation processes, right? So some of them is, you can actually give products that gives a better customer experience through some kind of social networking, Web 2.0 crowd type thing. So take advantage of crowds and build them into your products and services. You can use data to improve products and services directly. And that could be crowd data or otherwise. And you can use data as input from your innovation activities. So you can actually ask people what they think about your innovation activities, or they can help you. And then you can also develop platforms of service crowds. I'm not going to go through one. We don't have enough time today to go through each one at a time, but I'm going to throw some different examples at you that touch on all these points, starting with the crowd part. Okay? So for the crowds, so crowdsourcing, what is it? So it's, open call, getting people to the things that you used to outsource or maybe hire somebody to do, but you could do that by using a multitude of people, let's just say. Some people call it a market with no ex-ante contract, because basically most crowds is paying for performance. So you only pay when someone actually gives you something. And finally, you get a bunch of random people over the internet to solve a problem for you, something like that. I have a little paper on this that I published a couple years ago in AMR, Academy Management Review, with Alan Afua. And basically, just to give you the analogy here, it's like imagine yourself on a rugged landscape, we would call it, and that you're trying to get as high as you possibly can on the rugged landscape, but you are limited to how much you can search in your local area. That's normal, right? I mean, you think about that because, if you're in a company and you want to go into some new field, you can't just have all of your employees learn about this new field in one day. It's going to take you a long time. They have training. You probably have to hire new people. You might be able to buy another company, but that's slightly risky because you might not know enough about that field to get a good company. So it's not so obvious. You can just shoot from one area to another. So that's what this little A is. A is the focal agent, and the little ring around A is how far A can possibly get on this rugged landscape in whatever new area they want to go to. Then finally, you've got other people, and because of the fact that you have now IT platform that hits a bigger, in this particular case, geographic area, but you can imagine the analogy to be any kind of resource that you want, like a knowledge resource or money resource. So think about crowdfunding. So there are people placed all over this landscape, and now you impose an IT platform on them to be able to grab the knowledge of the people placed around the platform. Okay, and the same thing holds for crowdfunding. You have people who want money, they don't have any money. There are other people around who have money, and now we're enabling some kind of matchmaking process that enables you to get access to whatever that distant resource is. So that's why in the paper we said something like, this is turning distant search into local search. It's making it more, it's giving you more access to distant information than you had before. Okay, this is a very recent case. Actually, I heard this guy interviewed on the radio. I was going to try and play it for you, but I think it might be. I'm going to make one risky, try and show maybe one video. And I thought it might be too risky to try and do two different things with sound and everything. So, but this guy was interviewed on the radio, and I think it's a very interesting case because it's basically Zillow, which you may have heard of as a real estate, it's like real estate information website. Okay? It's popular in the US. And the idea was they have this thing called the Zestimate. And the Zestimate is actually the thing that attracted people the most to the website. And all it is how much is my home worth? Okay, so they do a kind of statistical analyses in the background, and they try and calculate how much your home is worth based on other homes in the area, how many bedrooms you have, blah, 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 what schools are like. And so at some point, they hit a plateau for how well they could accurately assess the price of the house. And by the way, the houses get sold every once in a while. So you have a kind of training data somehow. I mean, you know how much everything gets sold for in the end. So the idea is to try and minimize the error of the house prediction value. Because the more accurate it is, the more people will love it. And almost everyone consults this site before they buy a place. They check before they sell. And even if you're looking for a house, it's actually one of the first places that people go. So they opened up to kind of a competition this year. And they basically were trying to improve the Zestimate. The Zestimate's the estimate of the housing prices. In 4 counties, they uploaded data, and they had a $1 million prize, and their current error rate's about 4.2%, which is not bad, actually. But they wanted to improve that, and there's certain counties that they're very bad in and certain other ones that they're good in. They wanted to improve some of these bad counties. So they had teams of people working on this, and they actually put it on a Kaggle competition, which is like a data science site that you can use, a contest site. And they basically said, we're going to pay $1 million prize to whoever can come up with better estimates. And so this one team just won recently, had 4,000 or something entries, which is quite good. And you can go on there and look on it online, and you'll see all the leaderboard and everything else for it. So it's very, very interesting. I hope that wasn't anything technical. That sound that I just heard. So it seems like my computer's still working, so let's keep going. Highly analogous is something I studied a lot. I wrote a little paper on it, if anyone's interested, in computational and mathematical org theory on the Netflix prize. And basically, it's the same idea. They actually, people rate films. They try and give you recommendations. And, if you give bad recommendations for too long, people stop using the service. Now, they've diversified a little away from that now, because now they're doing original content and they're doing original shows. So it was good for them. But on the other hand, it's still an important part of their business is to actually recommend films for people to watch or anything else, any kind of entertainment. So basically what they had was this issue where they were, again, hit a plateau in recommending how good a film would be. And here we collected more data on the company. So my former PhD student, Andre Villarreal, contacted them, and we were able to work with them a little bit and find out a lot more about how this contest worked. So basically, if I think you're going to love a film and you hate it, so I think it's a 5-star film for you and you rate it 1 star, then that's a difference of 4. And since this error is so important, they would square the error. So that would be worth 16. That's like 16 points. So you want to have as low as possible. I think it's 5, you think it's 5, 0. Perfect. That's a good prediction. So now the idea is, how are we going to reduce this error term by 10%? We'll pay $1 million. And so you can see that within 15 months, they already had 25,000 teams. They got 21,000 submissions within 15 months, and they actually got an 8.6% improvement. They thought it would take at least 5 years for this. They got an 8.6% improvement in 1 year. And actually, that's the one they ended up implementing, because that was actually the most scalable solution they got. That was the one after 1 year. So within 3 years, they actually paid the $1 million. They got the solutions in. And then Andre, asked them for their data on all the solutions that they got. So that's what this graphic is. And you can see every little dot on there is another solution that people proposed. Okay? And of course, there's some interesting things about this graphic. When it runs after 9 months, there are still people turning in solutions that give you no improvement. They had a test database. So they gave you the 100 million entries online. You play around with it, and then analyze it, and then they have another database and that they compare how it works, and they rate you. So one thing is you can see that some people are turning in bad results, but another thing is you can see is like these different triangles there, the little green triangle, the red ones. Those are different teams that eventually merged and won the competition. And you can see that they started in a very bad place, but relatively quickly they moved down to the frontier, and the frontier then got them all the way to this very end. And some of those top teams merged into one team. Actually, the same thing with the Zillow. That's actually kind of interesting case. The Zillow case was actually 3 different people who merged into one team to win that Zillow competition. Andre was interested in this topic because we were thinking about how quickly the whole system would converge if you were allowing people to switch teams and merge teams and stuff like that. So it's actually kind of an interesting project. We didn't really do much with it. We just did the case study, then we did a simulation of how fast the crowd will converge on a solution. Inside tracker. So now you're talking about comparing your blood test with 150,000 healthy people. And I have tons of nutrition type examples. I think nutrition examples are very popular right now because no one wants to touch medicine because the medicine ones have required too much regulations and things like that if I think it's a health-oriented thing. So most people now say, I'll give you sports supplements, I'll give you nutrition vitamin supplements, and I'm going to compare your blood type, your stool sample, all kinds. There's so many things out there right now that compares every part of your body to some kind of healthy population, which I think is kind of interesting. Then there's this thing, this open food, I did this hackathon. I've been doing hackathons lately, which I think are very interesting. And so this one that I did last year was called the Open Food Data Hackathon, where a supermarket was trying to decide whether or not to put nutrition labels on food. Okay, so they have them already. But should I give you an API for that? So in other words, am I going to give you access to my database on food labels? Okay, and most supermarkets say, no, I'm not going to let you touch that stuff. However, we were able to convince them, listen, if you have a hackathon, you have 100 people, actually in our case 200 people, they're all going to be working on what you can do with these data. And then you can pick a winning team or teams and you can incubate them and see what happens and how people use the data, which might be actually interesting for you for your future product portfolio. Of course, you have supermarkets, but maybe you can do something else too, So in the end, they agreed to do this. And so we wrote a little paper in this called Frontiers in Nutrition, where we described what happened in this whole competition. And one of the things, so you can see here some photos of all the students were there, and it was open to the general public. So it wasn't just students, it was people from all walks of life. And they were all brainstorming and making prototypes. And then I was thinking afterwards that it could be interesting to take these kinds of information and maybe kind of do a big data analysis of all their ideas. But of course, I haven't done that yet. But it was just something that I thought about. We talked a little bit about it this morning. So there might be some really interesting sources of information here. One could be just the prototypes and then incubate them and see what happens with the winners. And the other could be maybe take a look at all the ideas, because these people, when you're doing a hackathon like this, you're getting thousands of ideas, because they're doing wild brainstorming, et cetera. And maybe look at that and try and analyze that and see if there's anything interesting in that too. So that could also be another source of innovation. And then finally, these are kind of your typical things you probably heard about already, like the Gold Corp case, where they posted their, geological data online, and people tried to find out where there was going to be gold. And the winners in this particular case were from Australia. They had not been to the place in Canada. They weren't even geologists. They were in some related field. And so they were able to come up with some very interesting solution. And then this last one is kind of a warning point, which is that the Gulf of Oil, you probably heard about the Gulf of Mexico oil spill, where they were trying to stop the flow of oil, and they were basically running out of ideas. So they had opened up to a crowdsourcing contest. Now, the only problem with that was they had no automatic evaluation procedures. So there was basically like a labor-intensive, part where they got all these great ideas, and then they were basically spending this large amount of time sifting through the ideas. So when you do these things, you also have to remember, you can't just get the ideas in. You have to figure out how you're going to process the ideas once you have them. A lot of people do peer voting, and then you'd maybe have a jury select or have some scientific, group look at the solutions at the end and try and pick a good one at the end. Because otherwise you're open to this problem. Either it takes too long, or if you do it the other way and make it fully automated, you could also have lots of sabotage. And you probably heard about the case of Boaty McBoatface. If you didn't hear about that, you should Google it. But the quick version is they had some important research vessel in the UK and said, how are we going to name this thing? We'll open to the general public for ideas and voting. And then someone said, I think we should call it Boaty McBoatface. And then everyone voted for that one, And then they were stuck because the public voted for Boaty McBoatface, And so what they ended up doing is a kind of a compromise where they took one of the, like a boat that's on that giant research vessel, and they called that one Boaty McBoatface. And they made a more sober title for the main one. Okay, I'm not going to go through this time on 3D printing your own food, nutrition bars, trying to get people, to give ideas to you. Maybe I'll come back to this to such business models later on. Crowdsourcing pictures, so when you're on a diet, you can figure out how much you ate without having to type in all the food you ate, etc. And then, I also like to think about making platforms sometimes. And like an Amazon Mechanical Turk is a great platform. It's very interesting, and it's interesting from a point of view of as a user of a platform. It's good. It's access to a crowd. But it's also interesting from a corporate strategy point of view of Amazon deciding that they wanted to make a crowdsourcing platform, which they didn't have to do, but they figured, okay, we can handle credit card payments, we can do micro payments, we can do, we can make money on float, and we have a lot of infrastructure already there that we can use to make this kind of this diversification move somehow. So it's interesting. Okay, just to finish up with this little crowdsourcing part, I'm a big fan. I'm very interested. I just wrote a book. I just edited a book called Creating and Capturing Value from Crowdsourcing with Gigi Viscusi and Alan Afua. And we have lots of different examples in that book and think about how crowdsourcing can be used in different sectors and different actually fields of study, computer science and political science, et cetera. But if you just summarize some of the things think about, you have to give incentives to people. Most people are highly incentivized for fun. They love to have fun. If you can set up a kind of fun game, I didn't even go all the Google image label, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many games out there that people play that are actually Duolingo. That actually you have fun, that you're actually doing work while you're having fun. And I think that's actually pretty interesting. Now, if you're making money from it directly, you probably can't just have fun. You may have to pay people, but you can have a big prize. You can do little micro payments. There's lots of different ways of structuring it. But you have to sort of think it through when you're doing these things, how you want to set up the incentives of the people in the crowd. Okay, just to keep going here quickly with the Internet of Things, just to give a couple more examples. Here's the one where it's a fitness tracker and a scale and, your phone. So it's basically sending data from your fitness tracker to be analyzed along with your weighing yourself. So therefore, you can kind of, and again, they're avoiding medical stuff, but they were thinking about how we can use this information to give you sports advice, to give you vitamins, et cetera, et cetera. So now we're talking a little bit more in the real-time flow as opposed to just the one-off things. I thought this is a very interesting case here. This is the one where you take this pill, and I saw prototypes of this several years ago, actually. You take a pill, and it sends out signals from inside your body, and you can use it to see if you're compliant with medicine, how you're reacting to different, to medicine or to other things. And so, at the time that I was looking at these guys, they were trying to figure out what's their business model. Like, how are they going to approach this? Whom are they selling to even, Like, are they selling to patients? Are they trying to work with insurance companies? Maybe you want to sell it to the grandchildren of an elderly person because you're afraid they forgot to take their medicine, et cetera. You could tell, they didn't take their medicine today, So I think it's actually a very interesting case. It does introduce this idea of sensors and personalized medicine, personalized nutrition, et cetera. Of course, probably here everybody uses Waze. I know I do when I'm in a traffic jam. Or when I'm going in a place I don't know very well and I don't know the side roads and I want to get some good advice. I use this navigation system, which I think is very interesting. So it's got the sensor data, right? It's got your GPS location, and they're looking at that in terms of the crowd, right? They're looking at where everybody is and trying to determine which way to send you down the road. By the way, they will send you down random roads, I heard. So in other words, if someone hasn't driven along a road recently, and it's not too far out of your way, or maybe it's not out of your way at all, they might just send you down that road. So it's not obvious that they'll always send the same two people down the same road, even going from A to B at the same time, So actually very clever. But in any case, you can have the real-time traffic flow, so that's interesting. But the thing that's even more interesting maybe about this is that they're also giving a crowdsourcing element to this. So it's kind of a hybrid system here, right? So now you can say what your mood is. So here you can say, here's my mood, I'm happy. And when you're driving, you can have it set so you can actually see other people's moods. Now, they can also use that information and analyze it and to determine whether or not to send you down a certain road, right? Because, if everybody's in a bad mood in a certain place, you may not want to drive there, It might be some issue. So another thing that they do, which is I think is very interesting, is they also allow you to report events such as, there's an accident. It's pretty unobtrusive. You can say report an event, and you can say there's a car broken down. And while you're driving, it'll say, oh, there's a car broken down by the side. There's a police up ahead. There's a radar camera, you know? And it's very interesting from that point of view, but it's a little too effective. Actually, this just came out last week. New York Police Department demands ways to remove DW, driving while under the influence, checkpoint evasion feature. You know, you can see the picture here. Police hidden. So, you know, people could actually say, oh, there's a police, you know, slow down. And so they're basically saying that the article basically goes on and says that they have no legal basis. They can't actually stop them from doing this. But they tried to make it into like, oh, you're drunk driver. You're going to allow drunk driving with this, but which is not really probably the case in most cases. But anyway, it's kind of interesting because it allows the crowd to give input on pieces of the, and while at the same time they're processing all the censored information. Okay, now quickly, business models, business model innovation. Yeah, okay, quick. Just very quickly, I'll skip the part that's saying business models interesting. Everyone likes thinking about business models. There's been tons of publications on business models, and most of them are from people who work in industry, not from academics, which I think is also which is also quite good. It's one of the rare, you know, it's one of the rare things where people and practitioners publishing more than academics on a certain topic. You know, yes, internet's important. I don't know if you recognize this person, but just to give you a little intro here, this person was the developer of the Xerox machine, the Xerox machine photocopier. And basically, it was too big, too expensive. People didn't want to buy it, et cetera, et cetera. They said, we'll give you the machine and we'll lease it to you. And now you buy the paper from us. You buy the toner. At the time, they didn't call it toner. But you know, the idea was, we'll send you the supplies. Now people call it a razor and blades model. You know, we give you the razor, we sell you the blades. You know, so it was very clever. This person's an entrepreneur in Israel who wanted to make battery charging stations. So battery charging, so the idea was people are very afraid they're going to run out of power while they're driving an electric vehicle. So his idea was, hey, why don't we take the battery out, we'll swap it with a new battery, a fresh one, and we'll charge it offline. That way people don't have to wait around for the battery to charge. Very clever. We'll charge them a subscription fee, you know, and then they will have like a kind of a subscription service for keeping your battery charged. So that was the basic idea, which I think was also very clever. Now, unfortunately, you know, it didn't work out. The Xerox machine worked out very well, you know, in the sense that it was very super popular, big company developed on that, business model innovation. This one also is saying it's you know, technology doesn't have any value. You need to bring it to market and basically connect it with the business model. They created and attempted to implement radically new business models, but it also involves undertaking risks. So it turns out Better Place didn't work this time around. Probably the infrastructure is still, you know, just too difficult to implement in one massive, you know, in one fell swoop. There's lots of ways of describing business models. You probably heard about all these things, but just to, you know, there are different ways of handling it. Business model navigator, zoos online, business model generation, Canvas, et cetera. And then there's this little article there's a book chapter here with Lorenzo Massa, and he and I were interested in different kinds of business model innovation. So we started thinking about, you know, business model design, which is like your first business model, right? Like an entrepreneur's first business model. And you could be either something that you copy, like Travelocity is like Travelocity is the online travel agent. And when they came out, they basically sold you airplane tickets over the internet, and they got a commission from the airlines. That's how they operated at the beginning. So were they the first online travel agency? No. But it was their first business model. So we say that's business model design. Then you have like this Swedish newspaper, Metro, you know, which is like you get the free newspaper when you go into the Metro. And you know, it's subsidized by advertising. So it's kind of like this first commuter, you know, advertising model. You could say, well, Village Voice also did that. Fine. But for commuters, it was very clever, I thought. It was a very clever idea to say, well, we're going to have a big audience. We'll give it to them for free, and we'll have the advertisers pay for it. And of course, then the second thing is on the right-hand side, you have business model reconfiguration. We'll come back to this at the end today, which is business model reconfiguration, your second business model, your third business model, et cetera. Like here's the example we have of General Motors. They make cars, and then they basically created a bank, and the bank lent money to people to buy the cars. Turns out that this business unit of GM was the most profitable business unit for decades. It went on. They made more money, you know, lending money to buy cars than they actually made, you know, on the cars for a while. You know, it's not always been the case, but for a while. and then of course you have this idea of iTunes, which is digital rights management in the to prevent people from just copying wholesale and giving music to their friends or to whoever they want. The idea was we're going to institute a digital rights management system. We're going to prevent people from copying, and we're going to sell it so cheap that people are going to be wanting to pay for it, and they'll pay for it and get a legal copy, and we'll do revenue share with the content creator. So that was the beginning of the iTunes store, combined with the iPod, which then turned into the kind of the platform model that Apple's been very, very good at managing for the last 20 years or something like that. So it's interesting. So that would be kind of an example of a reconfiguration, and we would say kind of an innovative business model as well. Okay, this is my favorite example. There's a secret to this graph, but anyways, pay once, eat all year, lunch and dinner for $59.99. It's ridiculous. So but okay, so it at least gives you the idea, like, hey, this could be a subscription model for a restaurant. Okay, so it's kind of an interesting business model innovation. Now, the secret of this is that is inside an amusement park. Okay, but still, I mean, it still gives you some idea. It's actually kind of interesting thought experiment. Why do we have to pay for service? Why can't we do a subscription or do something else? I'm not going to go through these slides, but basically, what's the role of corporate innovation? Think about when can we do more business model innovation. Maybe we could do it in the more mature phase of the market. So Lorenzo and I were talking about this in our book chapter there. Like you want to navigate that. Of course, you could have a lot of product innovation at first, and you have process innovation, which gets you more efficient, and then maybe you either start with a new technological, discontinuity, or maybe you have a business model innovation that keeps the industry going even after a mature stage. So I'm going to skip these things and talk a little bit about AI, since we are here also to talk about AI in some sense. And we talked about generating data. So what can we do with these data? And just to say that, of course, there's the generic idea of AI, which is to have a machine that acts like a human or something like this, going back to John McCarthy. But basically what most people talk about now is just simply supervised machine learning. It's a very narrow definition of AI. But I think that's the most used definition right now. It's a big market. It's right now 1 billion. And within 6 years, of course, the variance of these forecasts, you can search online for it. The variance of the forecast is enormous. I think within 5 or 6 years, it'll be somewhere between $5 billion and $8 trillion. But still, there's some opportunity here to take advantage of. What's been the biggest gain so far? I think that obviously pattern recognition has been the biggest winner so far, right? All the voice recognition, speech recognition, tagging of photos. I mean, you probably noticed this within the last year or two that the tagging of photos has become uncannily. Before it was, it was completely inaccurate. And even now on your laptop, even on the, on my laptop there, when I open up the photos, there's actually something called People. I don't know if you noticed on this. You can go on there and look at People, and it tries to automatically tag everyone you took a photo of. And of course, you can train it too. You can say, no, that's not my kid, and it'll modify things over time. But basically, I think that this sort of photo tagging, Facebook is getting super, super accurate. It's made a lot of strides recently. So that's really almost done. Computer vision factories is pretty much, very, very good, very advanced. Self-driving cars getting there. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then we have these other ones like diagnostics and problem solving is also getting very good these days, right? So we have the idea of inventory control. That's pretty good. And there you've got you could actually have sensors that do machine to machine. That's also kind of interesting, right? Trading bots. Actually, I think we talked a little about that this morning. That's something that's really, that's becoming very, very good. Fraud detection is getting really good, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. Medical diagnosis is still, shaky, and for a variety of reasons, some of which are not very well understood. Some diseases are very understood, and some less so. Reviewing contracts for loans is also something that's pretty much happening already. In the future, there might be, pharma drug development, augmented reality, virtual reality. So, showrooms where you can, either an augmented fashion, you go into an empty room, and then it tries to think what, the system tries to figure out what you want to see, and then you can see it either virtual reality or an augmented reality format. So there's things like this happening that are coming down the road. I actually saw a demo of this at Telefonica in Madrid last year, and I was pretty impressed with the virtual showroom stuff that they're working on. Okay, now let's think about this in terms of your product portfolio, your service portfolio. Most of these things that I just described on this page are process innovations. They're not really, new products and new services. They're mostly making companies that are already in business more efficient and cutting costs. And so that's why I think that personally, when people say, is the internet, is AI going to wipe out everyone's job? I feel like, well, if you think about it this way, I don't see it happening. Maybe we'll talk in a minute about prediction. Maybe people who are making predictions, maybe they'll be vulnerable, and there'll be other sorts of people that are substituted out. But in massive job loss, I don't see it happening in the near term because of this fact that we're mainly talking about process innovations here. Okay. Now the credit card fraud example is a great example, and I don't know how many people here have had a fraud alert, recently, but of course, yeah. I mean, if you travel a lot, you're getting them constantly. And you're going to a new place, and then you're going to some place where they don't maybe check an ID, or maybe they don't have the PIN system or whatever, and then, boom, you get a message on your phone. Hey, are you really at a gas station in Newark, New Jersey right now? Yes. Okay. Fine. If you got declined, just put it through again. It'll work this time. And if it worked, fine. Now we know that you're there, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's very interesting. From this point of view, you see, it's not changing the whole payment system. It's not changing, it's not really changing much about the finance, but it's definitely saving big credit, the credit card companies and banks lots of money, because they are the ones who have to pay if there's fraud. You don't usually have to pay. In most countries, the cardholder does not pay if someone steals their card. So this way is a way of keeping it down. There's other things like these manufacturing, reducing manufacturing defects on different dimensions. That's also efficiency. There's like the Airbus case, which is very interesting. Like they have these big shifts, and they have an enormous number of workers working on planes, and they all leave and have a new shift come in to train the people about what the prior shift did. They developed some AI systems for that, and actually, so it's all about, saving money, right? Saving costs and becoming efficient. There's some product innovations, and we'll talk more about some of these later on, but basically they're pretty few and far between. This is just a picture of how the fraud works, right? In general, you can see that you make your transactions, and then you go to your merchants, and it's fine. Now here, a fraudster takes your card, and then they do a $2, then they make a $5, then a $10, then $4,000. So it used to be people would just look for these things. It was kind of a labor-intensive, to go through this. Now we can do automatic, checking on these things and try and stop them before they happen. So we're not going to agree to that $4,000 charge necessarily after this testing mode. There's another great example, which I've been working a lot on fintech. I've been very into fintech lately. And some of these ideas of like bank loans, like how does a bank loan automated, and what do you do for using AI in banks and for making loans to people? They'll fill out the form, the application, you go for the interview, they decide whether or not you're a good person, if you're going to pay them back or not. And actually that's okay, but that's not a very good way of determining whether people are going to default on a loan. So someone at one point said, hey, maybe we should look at their Facebook friends, and see who they are, and then we can maybe see how wealthy they are or something like this, and maybe they'll be more likely to pay back the loan if they have wealthy friends, which is it's actually true. If you actually have friends who have good credit ratings, then you also are more likely to be able to pay back a loan. Unfortunately, the problem, so it's not 100%, it's not very accurate. It's probably more accurate than the loan application. But the thing is that on Facebook, you have lots of fake friends. You're not really friends with them, and you have no way of knowing how good a friend you are with someone on Facebook. So there have been other people that have been looking at things like, if we could look at your cell phone records, if we could look at your GPS location of your phone, actually, within a very short amount of time, you can determine how good a credit risk someone is. And there's someone I know who started a company in this area called Distilled Identities. And they are basically looking at where you go, and in a very short amount of time can determine how good a credit risk you are, which is highly accurate, actually. So there's a lot of things like this. These are all about process innovations in some sense. There's a bunch of things going on in pharma. I just want to highlight this in case anyone here is in the pharma sector. There's a guy named Smith here. I know it's not a very common name, but but you can probably search for it and search for the blog that he makes, because he makes a blog on what's going on in AI, and basically he crowdsources that. So he basically says, if anyone knows what's going on in your company, let me know and I'll add it to my list. And as you can see from this list, a lot of these things are about clinical trials and things like that. So basically, you know, do we abandon the clinical trial or not? Of course, there are other things too happening, like there's some, you know, cancer research there using IBM Watson, et cetera. I'll come back to that in a minute. And there are other ones too, but a lot of them is really about process innovation in the pharma sector. Okay. I don't know how many people saw this book, this recent book called Prediction Machines, but I figured I would just spend a couple minutes talking about what their ideas in this book are. I think it's pretty good. It's actually a pretty nice introduction to economics of AI. So, you know, and their basic idea is that the cost of prediction is falling, right? I mean, as we know, sensors are getting cheaper and cheaper and more accurate, and our ability to handle large data sets is also becoming more, you know, accurate, and we can make better predictions. So basically, they said, you know, it's all about predictions, and new technology is, in this particular case, enabling better predictions. So that's the thesis. And you know, there's a growing importance of data, of judgment, and action. So we're not replacing all the people here. We still need people to do lots of decision making and actions, even if we don't necessarily need people so much anymore for predictions. This is just a little reference to an article. I was working on this Industry 4.0 stuff, you know, 20 years ago or something, and I started thinking about it with Peter Bruce. We started thinking about different investments that you could make, and what would be the progression, you know, that you should do for trying to make an investment in Industry 4.0. And so part of the idea here was, well, you could start out, you need to build the bandwidth. If you don't have the bandwidth, if you don't have the infrastructure, you know, you can't do any of these things. So it's really hard to impose an IoT-type solution with a new service or product if you don't actually have the infrastructure for handling the IoT in the first place. So part of this is, you know, make the investment. Then you need to automate the office, the factory, the supply chain, all that sort of thing. That's like the industrial automation part. And, you know, if you think about it from the point of view of this book Prediction Machines, that's like saying, you know, standardize AI-enabling existing processes. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. And then the final stage is you want to innovate through IT, and that's where you want to develop your new products and services that build on your IT expertise in whatever your sector is. That's the idea. And then I won't go through this chart in detail, but basically the argument that we said is, you know, you're going to have operational things. Operational things means anyone can do it, and you have to do it. It's a Red Queen type effect you probably all heard about already. Like Red Queen has to keep running as fast as she can because otherwise she'll fall behind. And so that's like saying I need to make the investments in the IT just to keep up. But then there's another component to it, which is a right-hand side called strategic, you know, which we call strategic internetworking, which is basically then we need to build on the IT, you know, that we have to make something special that it's hard to copy, et cetera, et cetera. And we can't really outsource that. We need to do it in-house for that reason. Okay, I don't have time to talk about this latest paper I was working on with Gianvito Lanzola and Danilo Pesce, but basically we were arguing that it's not, that digital transformation is not a 100% good thing. I mean, it's a good thing. You should do it, you know, but you have to be aware that it might affect your innovation processes too, and it might make it, you know, in some sense, it might make it more centralized and controlled because it's easier to control lots of things, you know, if you have a digital transformation. That's good. But on the other hand, maybe your control is not so good. Maybe you need to have lots of people with lots of different ideas, you know, arguing and fighting inside your own company. So we're basically, you know, and then you have your mix of digital skills and legacy skills. You know, it's a balance, and so you don't want to have, you know, all digital skills and get rid of all your legacy people. Nor do you might need some digital skills in your company. So we basically in this paper we're talking about the mix of different product development strategies you could have for open innovation, given that you're doing a digital transformation. I don't want to go into details on this one because it's kind of a complicated argument. But basically, that's the idea. You know, you might create new silos, or you might break down silos. Think of it like that. Like your knowledge silos might be making it easier for people to communicate, or you might make them so specialized that they stop talking to other people. And that's not necessarily a good thing for innovation. Okay. Now, getting back to this Amazon case, which I think is very interesting, this book. Recommendation. So what they basically say in this book is that if you had a dial, you're going to imagine that you can dial the prediction accuracy. Okay? And so the example that they give is Amazon's making recommendations for you to buy things. And actually, believe it or not, on average, all of us are going to buy 1 out of 20 things that Amazon recommends. It's pretty high. It's actually pretty good, 5%. Not bad. Now, what they're proposing is a thought experiment. Imagine you could raise that to 50%, or 60, or 70, or 90. What would you do? How would that change your thinking about your company? And in this particular case that they said is, well, maybe you could just ship people, you could just send them the stuff that they want before they even go online to look for it. Because I know what you want. Right? And I think that's actually, kind of interesting because, most people laugh when they hear that. However, what you may or may not know is that Amazon filed for a patent on predictive shipping a few years ago. And were granted a patent on predictive shipping. So in other words, they think it's going to happen pretty soon. I mean, so in the book, they're encouraging you to, in your own company, to figure out where you are in this, in this transformation stage. When is it going to be? When are you going to have highly accurate predictions, and how's that going to affect your business? Okay, so then they basically have this idea for developing a data-driven strategy, which if I were working with people from companies, and maybe I would spend like several hours on this, just go through one at a time, and brainstorm a little bit about how you could develop your own data-driven strategy. What kind of predictions do you need to make? How would you add sensors or whatever, or crowds to your product portfolio? One of the things that they bring in the book, which I think is kind of interesting, but I think is slightly controversial, and I wanted to augment that a little bit, which is this idea of trust the machines, because it turns out that indeed most of the predictions are actually better than human predictions now in many cases. And so, but the problem is that people often override the computer prediction. Okay, and the question is, how do you make a system where people trust the machines more? So, maybe what you do is you say you can override anytime you want, but when you override, you have to explain why you overrode it. Okay, and they did some tests. They showed some tests of HR managers versus computer predictions on who would be a good employee. And after 1 year, or even 2 years later, the computers were better at predicting who was going to be the good employee than the HR managers were. So why do the HR managers always override what the computer thinks? You could think of lots of different reasons, I'm sure. But it's something to think about. And so how do you want to handle this merger between the digital and the analog world? However, I have to, I agree with this. I think that's actually very smart. But I think we also have to be very careful about the bias that we have. And by bias, there's lots of reasons, lots of things to think about when you think about bias. When you think about AI, most of us are thinking about like the generalizability of the training data versus the production data, right? Which is true. I think it's true. This is a very interesting person, Cassie Kozyrkov. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she was giving a keynote speech at a conference I organized this past year. And she's written some very interesting blog posts on AI. She's like an AI evangelist for Google, a data science evangelist for Google. Okay? So she's got very interesting thoughts. And part of her thought is that, it's also a fairness issue here. It's not, you don't want to just simply mimic all the biases of the humans, right? You don't want to just create a system that just mimics the biases of the people. You want to actually have something that's more fair in some ways. That's actually correct. That would be taking advantage of everybody's human capital. So if I think that these recruiters are biased against women, for example, like they won't hire women, let's just say. You don't want to create a system that does what they do, because maybe, but you're wasting. So she's got some pretty interesting articles on this topic. I think it's worth reading some of them, basically saying this is a socially constructed activity, and this is all, there's no such thing as objective data, which is really true, right? So I think there's a fairness element here, which I'll show you. Maybe I'll show you this little video if I have a minute. Well, it's already one. I don't know if I show you the video or not, but there's also this one about this IBM Watson. This is another case. This is not a fairness per se, but this is like a very important case where this Sloan Kettering Cancer Center tuned IBM Watson and working really well for cancer diagnoses, and then they brought it and tried to implement it at another major cancer center called MD Anderson in Houston, and it just did not work. It was inaccurate on false positives and false negatives and things like that. And how they tried to tweak it and fix it and for a long time, and finally just gave up and said we're not going to use this system, And it was they're both in the U.S., they're both major cancer centers. So what's the deal? Like, what is so different between these two cases that it's just so poor at generalizing? Okay, so do you think I can spend just 1 minute on the video? Okay, I'm going to attempt to show you a video now, which I thought was very interesting. And end show. Let's see if I can do it. This will take only a couple minutes, and I'm at the end of my presentation, almost at the end. So basically, it's only take a couple more minutes here. In Switzerland, we get very nervous if someone overruns or something. Okay, let's try this. Okay, wrong browser maybe. Here it is. Pretty interesting, eh? I think it's, so, I agree with this idea of trust the machines, but on the other hand, I think we have to be extremely careful here, that we're not going, so there's a practical element of it, which is like, you're kind of leaving a lot of money on the table, and then there's a fairness element of it, which I think this is illustrating in some way. So I think it's actually, yes, we should trust the machines, but we have to make sure that we can get the systems correct before we trust them too much. Okay, finally, let me just finish here now. Industry 4.0 AI business model. So there's different aspects of this, and I've been trying to organize my thoughts on this for the last few months. And so tried to organize it in a way of thinking about startup business models and then incumbent business models. Okay? So the startup business models are really, there are companies doing all of these things right now. So we're thinking about like bolt-on business model. What does that mean? Bolt-on means you're just attaching yourself to a current data stream and you're analyzing the data stream as you go. So you can imagine like these companies here as Chorus AI and Gong are basically going into Salesforce data. So they're attaching to companies' current Salesforce data systems and analyzing it and then giving them insights into their customers, et cetera. Then you've got like your asset tracking companies that are coming in, and of course this is, you can imagine this is a huge opportunity here, right? For your supply chain management, et cetera. So you've got companies that are actually producing systems to do asset tracking in one way or another. And you've got your vertical processes. So you want to go into a business process and you want to try and automate it, right? Just like we talked about. And that would be like your, your process innovations. Then, so this would be like, there are companies that are trying to do this right now, like these IAS, the IBM Watson is actually doing this a lot. So going in, trying to understand one particular vertical business process and trying to automate it using AI. And then finally, you've got your remote diagnostics type companies that basically try and integrate data from remote sensors, like, for example, for indoor agriculture. Now, if we think about the incumbents, obviously, the biggest one is servitization. That's pretty clear. Servitization means adding a service to a product already. And so the example I worked on the most, I wrote a case study on Cemex actually, when they were equipping their trucks with sensors. And basically in Mexico City, they had horrible traffic. They made 10 years it took them to equip all the trucks, be able to analyze the data, and predict how long it was going to take to deliver the cement. Then they made a service guarantee on the cement. And then people paid more for the cement because it was a pure commodity product before that. So they paid more because they want to guarantee to get it there on time to a construction site. And that's a big competitive advantage. And it turns out that it turned them into one of the biggest cement companies in the world, if not the biggest. There's probably some in China that we're unaware of. But basically, they were able to buy up almost all the other cement companies because they were able to have these kind of proactive stance toward IoT. And basically, to this day, in fact, I just did one of the hackathons I did this past year was a Cemex hackathon on digitalization. So the employees could brainstorm on different ways of being more digital. They hired digital pros throughout the whole company to try and stimulate the innovation in the company. Of course, you've got your typical predictive maintenance type thing where you attach a sensor to a part, and then you give an uptime guarantee. You only pay when it's uptime. Building site, Caterpillar, earth-moving equipment. If it breaks, you don't pay, while it's down. So then you could go in and make a prediction on when the part's going to fail. And you got some other kind of autonomous processes, like, I thought this was a very interesting case, like this idea of the insurance company with the drones. And instead of sending inspectors up to the rooftops to see if there's damage, they send a drone out right as soon as this whatever storm or whatever disaster happens, and they can make a quick, visual examination of lots of buildings at once, and then they could process the claims a lot faster. So you can imagine that could turn into a kind of a competitive advantage for an insurance company if they offered a special policy. Look, you don't have to wait around. You pay us more, we'll automatically assess your damage quickly after something has happened, and we'll pay you quickly. So it's kind of an interesting idea. And then automatic fulfillment, that's your Amazon Dash, your automatic replenishment of, stuff that you do, that you buy all the time. Compliance monitoring for, regulatory compliance. You can have sensors, and you can think about how you could use that to comply with rules and regulations by monitoring it real time. Finally, I think that these are a little less common maybe, but I think there's also some interesting stuff going on here. With IP consulting or Red Hat. I think Red Hat's a very interesting case, basically selling a product that everyone else is, that you can get for free, which is Linux operating system. And how they crafted their business model over the years, and how they thought about doing consulting and helping you install it. And then they became a consultant. And by the way, IBM just bought them, you probably heard this recently, for I don't know how many billions, like $30 $5 billion, something like this, you know? And all they were doing was working on Linux, you know? It's actually, not all, I mean, it's a big deal, you know? But they were doing something that anyone can get and do on their own for free, you know, and they're selling services on it. And you've got your things like your crowd data, like your crowdsourcing, you know, hard drive qualities, et cetera. And you've got, you know, your spectrometer, so you're looking at machines, at materials, and then you're reporting it back to the central database, let's just say, which makes your device much more valuable because it's incorporating in real time what's going on. You know, people are using the spectrometer for new materials. Okay, let me conclude here just to say that business model innovation is also not obvious, though. When you're trying to implement these things, it's not so clear. And, you know, there are lots of reasons for it. Of course, one of the main reasons is there's some kinds of conflicts between your old one and your new one, right? And so you're trying to add a new business model or replace a business model. You have people fight it because people hate change and people don't want to change. And, you know, there's lots of organizational inertia, I should say. And I just want to point you to two little interesting articles by Kostas Markides, who thought about this a lot, who said, you know, maybe you should separate it. Maybe you should have it outside your company for the ones that have a high conflict and that are attacking a different market. And you should have the ones inside your company that are low conflict and are serving the same customers. And then in between the off-diagonal cases, you could decide to move it in or out of your company later type thing. So I think it's a kind of an interesting piece, this one, on managing two or more business models. And then he also wrote another paper with Daniel Oyon on the strategies that incumbents have used to react to another attacker using a different business model. And this one was published in Sloan Management Review, I think, in 2010. So I think it's also a pretty interesting case of thinking about how a company can bring something new in or make a reaction to some new technology that's available in the market. Let me stop there. I know I've overrun my time, so thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion. Okay, I'm going to put yours on. You want this microphone? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much for inviting me. Of course, it's a real pleasure to talk just after the professor. I don't mean it. It's probably a hassle, but I'll do my best. I don't know how you guys want to do this. Maybe you have questions in between the two. If people want to ask questions now. What I did is that I prepared a couple of slides and I picked them like 10 minutes before we started. But I think I picked the right slide, so I feel a little bit better now. What we can do is just go through the slides. It will, I think, illustrate some of the things you've discussed, and then we can have an open discussion probably. So my name is Laurent Bianchini. I'm responsible in Renault Trucks for connected services, and probably Renault Trucks, I don't know if you guys know Renault Trucks, it's like over 100-year-old company. We are known for making trucks the old way, so probably not known for AI and everything we're going to talk about today. But we're since 2.5 years, we've started a small team, my team, in order to try to catch up. And that's it. I also took my curriculum out of the presentation because I feel really ashamed comparing it to yours. So let's get right into the subject. First thing on this slide is what do we do and how do we look upon that subject? Of course, for us, we are an industrial company. We build trucks. We're good at managing plants. And everything started from somehow or around the truck. And one of the good things we had to deal with is that we got started in Renault Trucks. Renault Trucks belong to a much larger group called the Volvo Group, 35 billion euro turnover group in transportation. And even though Renault Trucks is not the most innovative BA of that group, the Volvo Group is very innovative. And we've been putting sensors in trucks for many years, not doing anything with the data. It's just piling up on the servers in Sweden and other places around the world. But when we got started 2.5 years ago, it was very interesting for us to see that okay, the trucks are equipped and we don't start with nothing. So very often one of the hurdles for industrial companies to get started is, okay, we want to do this. we have nothing connected, and it costs a fortune to connect. So not our case when we got started 2.5 years ago. The trucks are connected, and we took a decision because this is a very large subject. I think it really showed in your presentation. We decided that because it's new for us and it's a learning curve, let's get started around the truck, and let's try to focus on customer pain points where we think we are legit. So I can really relate to what you showed on, how you develop, you start to develop things that are close to your current knowledge. And this is what we did. So we focused in the middle here. You can see some of those customer pain points. Fuel economy is a big subject. This is a, how you say, society, concern. For our customers, it's a very big cost. So we started with this. And we did some very good progress with Fuel Eco. I think we developed an analytical way to look at how to improve the performance of a fleet, which is very unique. We developed that 1.5 years ago, and we've been absolutely struggling so far to actually turn it into a service that we could sell or give to our customers. Probably we need help with this. And it was very interesting because if you compare this to a little bit under, you have adaptive maintenance, failure prediction. This looked like more of a long shot for us to develop connected maintenance, predictive maintenance, and turn it into a business. And actually, I'm very happy to say that last month in January, we've launched our first connected maintenance product, which is sold within a maintenance contract. And it's a good start, so let's hope it continues. But it seems to have a lot of success already after 1 month in being sold. And 1.5 years ago, I would definitely have put my money on the Fuel Eco thing and not on the maintenance. So sometimes the planets align and sometimes they don't. We work on a number of other things, analyzing mission severity, vehicle configuration, predicting how a vehicle is going to behave in terms of Fuel Eco, for instance, in a specific environment. And we work also, we start to work a little bit on safety. We could work on many other things. There are many other pain points in the logistic world, but this is what we're focusing on right now. The second slide is all about, the first slide I showed, it's more content. So I'm developing intelligence, I write algorithm, and it can do things. But one of the questions is, how do I actually bring this into my business model, or how do I use it to modify my business model? This is really where we stand today. And we use this slide to explain our approach. What we try to do is we work around 4 main value proposals. The first one on the right here, we call it data as a service. This is nothing new, but basically we needed to put all the APIs in place so that we can, first thing, sell the data, sell access to the data to some of the customers, but also this is what you mean to develop partnerships and to work on integration of your vehicles in, I don't know if you know that, but the logistics industry is heavily digitalizing. And of course, your vehicles need to be, they will be part of a larger system in the future. So that's first value proposal. The second one is, I call it information as a self-service, is giving access to this content, this intelligence. Some customers, they want to access it directly. They don't have the means to deal with data or raw data. And they want to be able to read the result right away. And here we are working on portals, basically. And we have a project with some of the students. So Roland is working with me on this project. So there are two main projects currently. One is to be able to develop a portal for people that work with logistics from the office, or the office people in our customers' companies. And we're working on a second portal aimed for drivers. And drivers, it's a really specific community. It behaves like a community, and we're trying to have a specific approach to our drivers. And then the third value proposal on the upper left-hand corner is probably where we innovate the most, not innovation in terms of technology for say, or not only, even though if you're going to find a prediction in there. But and this is probably the most challenging, is how to use the same data, the same intelligence, the algorithm we develop, etc., and how to bring it in our brick and mortar retail system. Okay, and this is very complicated. Why? I don't know if you've been in a truck dealership recently. Probably not, if you're not driving a truck. And it's not the most modern dealership you're going to find. Sometimes it's a very conservative way of doing things, and it's kind of it uses very old IT systems, and the leap they would need to take to be able to use some of the things we're developing. Sometimes it's just two worlds that they have a difficult time understanding each other. So that's definitely a challenge. And the last value proposal in the middle, this is very often forgotten when we're trying to create new business models or transform our current business model, is of course, and specifically when you talk about service, and remember we are a truck making company, not a service company, being able to actually administrate and create a good customer experience, but also employee experience, is very, very important. So that's what the middle part is about here. Yes? Do you have legal issues by using customer data, using them for customer data? It depends what you mean by issues. We have hurdles. They may ask you, you use that data for my trip. Yeah, we have. It needs, of course, we don't really have issues because I think the legal ground is clear. Of course, companies are, interpreting and reinterpreting the law and adapting, because all this is very new. But I think that as for apps, when you click I accept on your terms and conditions, I think there are ways to allow everybody to use the data in a safe way. So we don't. It's a lot of work, but it's not really. It's not a blocking point, but it's a lot of work to make it legally sound. Yes. So this is this slide. So thank you very much for the transition. This is exactly what I would like to say on the next slide here. How do we look upon this? This is a way to look at it. Our traditional revenue streams in the truck industry are to sell new trucks, it's to sell used trucks, it's to sell parts, and it's to sell maintenance hours. And that's it. There's no other revenue in the truck industry than those four revenues today. Of course, when you look into, this is linked, this is a little bit between AI and services, but when you use digitalization, etc., and you create new, something new, this is the upper right-hand side here. What you're going to do is you're going to create a fifth revenue stream that you could call services. And that could be, these are examples, but that could be anything from, I think you mentioned General Motors financing. Of course, Volvo has like a bank also, and it makes a lot of money financing businesses to buy trucks. But it could be many other services. A very common service since a long time in the truck industry is maintenance contract. But it's interesting, maintenance contract, we make money, I don't know if you know that, but we make money on the parts that are in the contract. But on the contract itself, we don't make money. So is it a service? Is it not a service? It's just a way to keep the customers. And we are developing all those new services I talked about. So those new services, they will create a fifth revenue stream, and they will start to create alternative business models. And this is where it gets really interesting. I give you a very simple example you mentioned. Today, customers pay, and it's the same thing for your cars, you pay when your car breaks down so that it gets fixed. But you could have a Chinese medicine approach where you pay all the time so that the car or the truck never breaks down. Probably when you introduce electric trucks and cars, this will be a business model or a service you should be able to propose. Electric cars and trucks don't break down a lot. There's not a lot of wear on the components. And we know we're going to significantly lose revenue on the parts and maintenance hour side of our business. So probably one idea, it's one among other ideas, could be to have a Chinese medicine approach once we introduce those trucks. And of course, to be able to do that, you need to be able to predict, to monitor the health of your fleet from a distance, and you need to be able to act upon what you see so that the truck or the car is always available when the customer needs it. And the third way, and you mentioned that also, of course, for us, and this is only one example, but there are many others, introducing those technology and those new business models is to reduce cost. And this requires also a lot of work, but also, of course, I keep the same example, if you're able to predict maintenance issues early, perhaps you won't have to change the after-treatment system completely, which is going to be like 10,000 euro, and you just open it early, clean a little bit, and it costs 200 euro, and you're good to go for another 100,000 miles. So this is exactly, and we've been testing this for the past 18 months, and this, I have to say, this is working really well, and the customers really like it. And I think I have one last slide to maybe get some more of the discussion going here. I tried to write down a little bit where I see that we have a lot of difficulties, and it's mainly difficulties, to be frank, at all stages of moving forward with this. It's interesting. It's difficulties. If I go and I talk to my board to my executive management team, sometimes they have a hard time understanding why they should go and do this. Some of them absolutely want to do it. And I need to convince that we should do this and not this. And of course, when you go downstream to the dealership and you try to change the habits, etc., some guys will absolutely want to do it, but there's also a lot of resistance. So just going through this, maybe the first thing is this is not for us. And the ability to build up awareness in the company, this is one hurdle. What we did the last 2 years is we did examples. So we found sponsors, we found people who had issues where they needed help, and we proved that the new technology, it's not something, in the end, it shouldn't be something complicated. It can really solve a problem, and it works. And we proved it once, twice, 3 times, more. So step by step, working with examples, this is the only way we found, getting more and more sponsors into the subjects. I think you talked about this. I really liked it, talking about your current business model. And one of the things I think is important is, I translate it like this: don't look down on your, especially people working with this versus the other guys not working with this. Don't look down on your current business model. Your current business model is your bread and butter every morning. It's what pays your salary. And of course, it's not perfect. It can be improved. But I think one attitude I don't recommend is, I know it all. I'm in technology. I'm going to show you how you do a modern company. Probably not a good idea to take that approach. The third one is take investment decisions a little bit differently. I think this is nothing new. This is just talking about my experience. Going to a board of a company, asking for a lot of money for a business model that is not clear is also probably not a good idea, or it's just they're just going to say no thanks. So the way we did it is again, I think it's nothing new, but I think it works, is to look at what risk do I need to take the first step, and this risk maybe financially it's very small, and this is what everybody calls a proof of concept. A proof of concept and then a proof of value is just going step by step, and it's all about, I think, not frightening the people who are giving you money. That's basically what it is. And I don't know if it's like this in startups. Probably, as I understand startups, I haven't worked in startups, but in big companies it's exactly the same. My EMT is like a bank, and I need money, and they will finance me as their trust is building up, more or less. The fourth one is about acquiring new competences. Same thing for a company like us. It's complicated, and what has turned to be quite complicated is that you don't only need competences in AI or in technology and digitalization. You would need a mix between this and somebody that knows how a truck performs, somebody that understands our current business model. So it's been a challenge, and I was very lucky to find some people like this in the company and to be able to attract them in my team. But you need people that will, you could say they are a little bit geeks, but they like the analytics, they like the digital, etc. But they have experience in the truck business. And if you find those guys, this is probably very good. And of course, you can also acquire competences from outside of the company. And then the last one, I think I talked about this a little bit. It's all about, in the end, for what has worked. If I compare, because we have projects that fail and projects that succeed, of course. And if I compare, probably in the end, it's all about people and it's all about sponsors. It's finding this guy in one of your markets that has an issue he wants to solve, but that has also the will to put the effort into trying something new. It's, I think, here in EMLYON, you call those guys makers. So if you want to do it from, I sit in the HQ, my team sits in the HQ, and the group is quite large. If you want to do it from the HQ and you just want to push down things, there's absolutely no chance anything is going to work out. You need to find the makers. Hopefully you can find several makers in one area, and you need to work with them in order to be successful. So every time we succeeded with some projects, even sometimes complicated ones, probably it was always the people that made the difference. And I think that's it. That's it for... I don't know if there are some questions or...
Thank you. I'm Liisa Välikangas from Aalto University and Hanken in Helsinki. And my question is really about the kind of division that we might expect between sort of open AI versus closely held proprietary AI. And for instance, in Finland right now, there is a big race towards, well, where are all the coders to develop all the AI technology? And I'm just wondering, given your research and both of your experience in terms of open innovation versus proprietarily closely held, can we expect that there will be some open AI? Where would be the line between that and the kind of need to race to develop our own algorithms right now, which of course Google's and other companies already have? And then related to that, I find it quite interesting is that there is, it seems there is sort of a shortage of people who know how to code worldwide. And yet when you have these open competitions, there are 30,000 people suddenly. I mean, where do these people come from? Maybe we have exactly the wrong approach to this. Thank you.
Okay, I can probably for you. No, I mean, yeah, so you have some things to say about this as well. I mean, in the first part of your question was about, you know, how do you think about the openness of the AI activities? And I think there's lots of different ways of thinking about it. Some of them are, you know, small companies that don't have access to a lot of data. So what I've heard recently is that there's a kind of a pooling that's going to happen, and that they might be creating some kind of marketplace or some kind of, let's just say, infrastructure for small companies to do data analysis on their own, plus on of some peers, let's just say. And so that would lead you more toward a more open AI system. So usually the way I think about this is that, you know, I think about the complementary assets of the company itself. So if I have a way of, you know, if it's going to be an outsourcing type thing where I'm going to get some, you know, some insight from a crowd or some kind of from some general pool, then I better have something else So it doesn't have to be the AI part, doesn't have to be the proprietary part, in other words. As long as you have something else that you can then, you have the lockdown on this distribution network, you know, or you have some kind of lock-in on your, on some kind of standard or platform that you're using. So there, you can afford to be as open as you want. Now, on the other hand, if you don't have any of that and you really need it to be your primary competitive advantage, then you probably have to do it, you know, in-house, but then you have to be willing to build the competencies in-house, which might take some time, you know, which gets to your next point, which is, you know, there's a lack of, there's not a big liquid market right now for data scientists. It's actually a pretty scarce resource, and even it's true, I mean, of course, these crowdsourcing platforms are reaching, you know, tens of thousands of people, but those people are spread out over the whole world. You know, so it's not so clear that you can that any one country has you know, the ability to fulfill all the jobs. I think part of the thing is like the educational programs here and elsewhere is like it's happening slowly, and it'll catch up, and probably will be more of an influx into the market, especially how much they're paying right now for data scientists. In the meantime, you have to decide how much you want to, you know, how you can take advantage of a crowd and try and use a platform, try and get people around the world, gamify some part of it, something like this to try and get people to participate more. I've also heard recently of consulting companies that just do small data science projects. So that basically they say, look, if you don't have the infrastructure in-house, you know, you hire us and we'll bring a team in and we'll work on a short-term basis to get you, you know, going on a certain thing, maybe set up the infrastructure and set up the analysis, and that you can then turn around and use it later on. Of course, then you've always got this, you know, which is fine, and you can always make an agreement with a consulting company. The only thing then is there's always a slight chance that it's going to leak out, that they'll use the same thing. Oh, you know, you're in the truck sector. You know, oh, you know what, we'll use this in another truck company. And then, you know, you spent the first money, and you help them build the capabilities, and then they're leaking it to your competitors somehow. So it's a tricky trade-off.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe what I can add is how we do it today. And what we do is we work a lot on the use cases, and very often that's very important. It's a little bit, I don't know what you think, but just giving a lot of data to some AI specialists and you're not telling them anything, probably I don't see something very nice coming out of that. So we don't do that. We work a lot on the use cases, and then what we do is we try to have data sets that reflect what the use case we think we want to do. Okay, so we prepare this, but then to do the AI by itself, we don't have the competences. We don't know how to do that. So we need to. Some people, of course, because it's a big group, are starting, but probably we need help, and we need some specialists to whom we can give. Usually, what we do is we'd give you, if you do AI, a data set and a use case, and we'll give you an expert, probably the guy who's built the data set, that understands what we are trying to do or what we would like to do. And so you can have somebody you can have a dialogue with. Yeah. But then we need some AI specialist.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation, and I want to ask about the organizational inertia and the business model innovation. Like, what do you think, like, what are different aspects of organizational inertia that can reduce the value that is being generated from business model innovation?
Try it. Okay, so there are lots of different angles on it because it's set up, you know, there's so many ways that companies do things in a normal fashion. So it's kind of hard to break out of the normal routine. So sometimes it's just something as simple as like your sales force gets certain incentives, you know, your promotion systems are biased against the new one. You know, sometimes it's just hard for people to understand what the business model is or what the new one is. It's sometimes difficult to there's complexity, you know, there's like if you think about a business model canvas or any of those systems that you have out there to describe a business model, you might break it down to little components, let's just say. And people often don't even agree on the language, you know, that could be used in a business model. And furthermore, there's so many different combinations of aspects of a business model, it's hard to get people some people get paralyzed just thinking about how we can change, you know. And then there's the third thing is there's also dynamic interdependencies between your business models, right? So the pieces of your business model, you say, oh, I'm just going to change the customer segment over here, you know, and actually that has like a ripple effect across other things. And so people say, I don't want to change, you know, so it gets back to this inertia story. Inertia is, you know, multi-headed beast, you know, because it has all of these different aspects. And whenever you touch something that then affects someone else, it says, you know, that's going to, well, I don't know if I like that very much because that's going to change the way I'm doing my regular job, or I might not get my raise next year or my bonus, you know, and then people will fight it like hell. So there's that angle on it. There's also the angle on the AI side is that people are very afraid that they're going to lose their job to a computer, you know? So I think this is part of the deal too. So it's more than just the systems in place and the incentives, et cetera. There's also the idea that I'm training my future replacement. And, you know, you'd be surprised like how difficult it is to actually get data from people who have control over data, and it's usually decentralized. I have a case right now where I have a PhD student who's working for a big company. So the PhD student is my PhD student. The company says, oh, we love her. We want her to come and analyze our data for this, you know, this big data set, like let's just say from lots of different parts of the company. And I said, great, give me a grant and she'll, you know, spend her time at your, they said, well, actually, even better, she'll have better access to the data if we hire her as an employee and then you can still supervise her. I said, perfect. So that's 2 years ago. 2 years, we still do not have access to all the data. I mean, it's literally, we have the CEO, the head of research, the whole giant multinational company saying, give her the damn data so she can look at it and try and aggregate it. We haven't even talked about analyzing it yet, you know? And people say, yeah, we should do that. And then when you go down to the level of getting the data, it's very hard. And that makes it difficult to then come up with the, you know, what you're going to do, analyze it, new products, new services, new business models. And so it starts way back at resistance, starts early, you know, to changing things. And so I think it's a kind of it's a very tricky thing to do. That's why a lot of people would say, you know, you have to start something new outside of the company's walls and let them do it on their own and grow it like a startup almost. And then when it gets big enough, then you can bring it back in or you can shift some resources, et cetera. So I think there's lots of different elements to this problem.
Yeah, I really like this last story. We have the same kind of issues to get the data, and this is why I was saying a centralized. It's not because your board of directors is deciding it that it's going to happen, and because it's so much change. This is why I was talking about sponsors having some success somewhere. The success becomes visible. Hopefully, somebody else that sees it is going to want to participate. And it will spread. But the other way around, and I have an example on the same subject. We have our distribution network in Europe. Most of it is private. So it's private investors, and they are franchised into building a dealership. And today, we still don't have their data, or not all their data. And there is I give you a repair history, which should be like it's the most basic data we need. Some private investors, they don't want to give it to us, and they don't understand that if we had this all together, we could create a much better customer experience for our customers. But they feel threatened, they don't know, they don't want. Hopefully, I hope this will be solved this year. There are a lot of discussions. But yeah, people are very protective also of their data.
Yes, my name's Roland Boulou from the MBA program here. Also working for Renault on some project. Yeah. My question is also about strong AI. Given the little we know about our minds, I would like to know if we can expect to create, I will say, artificial conscientiousness.
I have no clue.
I don't know either. I mean, you know, that's a pretty tall order. Someone was just saying they just saw some demo or something. It was very recently. I think it was very recently. I can't remember now the details of it. But someone was proposing, like they had some vision for creating. Who was it that was just telling me? Damn, if I think about it, I'll give it to Margarita and she can pass it on to you. But basically, I think that's pretty far, off into the future. It's probably a little bit past my time horizon for analyzing this business implications, because, I think that most of the stuff I'm talking about here is very, medium-term type things. And having a real artificial consciousness or something like that I think that's the idea. That's what computer scientists want to get to sooner or later. It's just that we've been already talking about it for 50 years, and we're barely getting to the we're almost to the autonomous car phase, and that's pretty complicated. But that's like one like 10 orders of magnitude less complicated than a brain and a brain function. And by the way, they have these things, and you probably heard about this Human Brain Project, which is this European Union multi-billion-dollar, it's like a billion-dollar project that the European Union is one of flagship projects, and the U.S. is one also. So the Human Brain Project. So that sounds good, doesn't it? Yes, we're going to simulate the human brain. That's what they call. Now, actually, I know some of the people that are working on this thing. So guess what they're working on right now is, actually, that's the idea. But for now, we're working on this little tiny region of the mouse brain. And it's so complicated, we can't even model that. So that's where we are right now. Now, maybe, at some point, we're going to have better and better computers, et cetera. But we're so far down away from the human brain right now that it's hard for me to make a prediction about when it's going to happen.
Nothing to add on this. Oh, maybe I have a question on this. That means do we know clear limitations of the application of AI in the business world or in the industry? For instance, do we know that if you have a use case where the number of variables is so big that no, let's not even try it, it's not going to work, or is it pretty?
In my opinion, I don't know. I thought mainly it's the other way around. I think that people are saying that I don't have enough data, I don't have enough variables, I don't have enough data, So then, of course, the fewer variables to have, the more you're more leaning toward an unsupervised type training, type system. But on the big side, there's probably some computer limitations on what you can do. But yeah.
Maybe it could be the limitation of the use case itself. Like if the use case is too complex itself, probably this is my experience, that you have to break it down into something manageable by the data scientist.
Yes, and I think that's not so obvious to do even. I think that decomposing a problem into smaller pieces, first of all, it's doable sometimes. So maybe that's one of the keys, is modularizability of this. Just to get to your point. If you can't modularize something, if something has got lots of interdependencies, then taking off a chunk of it and working on that is not going to. It's going to create extra problems for everything else once you try. So maybe there's for the ultra complex, non-modularizable type problems that then go into the use case. Maybe that would not be my top candidate to start with.
I was thinking of the medical cases.
Right. That's one of the issues that they have with the medical. I mean, even that they did that case for the cancer center, which I thought was a super interesting, case, because it was really working there in one hospital, and then another hospital. Admittedly, different demographic, different rate area, et cetera, et cetera. That maybe there's, but it's not obvious why it wasn't working. So yeah, maybe these ultra complex problems are tricky. Sure. Why not?
Okay. My question is about the new economy which will come with the AI. We know companies are looking for profit, and with the AI we will get machine doing human work. That means somewhere we will have an increase of unemployment. This will also affect at the macro level the GDP of countries, because the consumption will be affected.
Yeah.
So another thing is that it will create a huge gap between rich and poor. Actually,
yeah,
I think maybe we are thinking of increasing the number of jobs. This is work government are working on that now, and they will be working on that again after.
Right.
So, are we optimistic or pessimistic about AI looking at this?
Yeah, I mean, everyone is going to have their own opinion about this, you know. I mean, there's going to be dislocation, I think, you know, and then the only question is it going to be creating more jobs than it's going to get rid of, you know? And I think that probably, in my own opinion, it will create more jobs than it gets rid of. But it doesn't help those people who, you know, actually truck drivers is one big one, actually. I heard, you know, recently that truck drivers are very vulnerable to automation right now. And so that's going to be tricky. I mean, you're not going to train them to be data scientists. I mean, maybe you could, but you know, that's going to be a tricky thing. So, you know, I think there's going to have to be some kind of effort made to compensate people or to try and help people with a transition somehow. I don't know enough about this, you know, the digital divide to say for sure. I mean, so far it seems as if indeed every single time we do come up with something new, it creates a, you know, a bigger gap between the rich and the poor, you know, and that's not great. It's hard to say. On the other hand, some people might argue, well, it might be technological leapfrogging might be possible, and you know, and automation might be helpful in certain cases, you know, in a developing country or something like this. But you know, the infrastructure needs to be there, as we talked about earlier, and so it just, yeah, the phone payment stuff is one example where they actually have the infrastructure. There was technological leapfrogging, fintech, and things like that. A lot of fintech happening in Africa, which is actually, you know, really, really good and super advanced, and you know, I think in some ways helping reduce in that particular sector the digital divide. But in general, I'm sympathetic to your argument, which is it's not so obvious if on net, you know, this is going to be a great thing, you know, or if it's going to be a big job, you know, dislocation, you know, program, which is going to create lots of other side problems too. But I'm thinking that it's going to create a lot of jobs. Just in general, usually we've seen like in the computer sector, you know, there've been lots of jobs created in the past. But on the other hand, it doesn't mean that no one's going to get left behind either. And then how do we deal with these people? I think that's a very, very open question.
Just adding that I'm also a very optimistic person, so I think it's going to be okay. I think we're all going to be okay. But there are some examples already. If you, one example I like in France is La Poste. La Poste is inventing jobs every day almost for their people. And you mentioned truck drivers, and truck drivers, people don't know, but they do a lot of other things than driving. Loading, unloading, dealing. Many truck drivers, they are the face of the transport company towards their own customer. So they take the time, etc. So a little bit, and this is why I'm thinking of La Poste. It could be a little bit the same thing. It will be a different job with different types of focus, maybe not driving, but hopefully it will create, you know, you can use your human resources better somewhere more useful or somewhere where it's needed, something like that. Yeah. Hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, I just add that, you know, that book, Prediction Machines, talks about this a little bit too, and basically saying, yes, the value of prediction, the substitute for computer prediction is the human prediction. And that part's, you know, probably vulnerable. But there's a lot of action and decision and things like that that are actually that are going to become more valuable because they're complements to data, you know. And so when you think about the complements to the data part, then that's actually, you know, could be a good thing. The substitutes, you know, that might be trickier somehow. But you're right. I mean, there's lots of other elements of a truck driver's experience. It's not simply about driving the car. So that's a very good point. Yeah. Yeah, here's a question over here.
Stéphane Nicoulet from the company Zillow. Mr. Bianchini, I have a question regarding actually the 5 million profit that you expect in 2020. What are you going to do with that? Are you going to employ people?
5 million you saw where?
I said 5 million. I saw that in 2020.
Should be much more than 5 million, hopefully.
No, gain from the saving, gain from the saving you're gonna expect in 2020.
This is a very good question. Right now, if I focus specifically on the new services, the connected services, taking us towards the new business models, you could say we reinvest all the money. We don't really make money on those. All the money we take, we use to try to develop more those services and those capabilities we'll probably need in the near future for bigger business model changes. Like we know that when there's more electric trucks, the connected maintenance, we need to be good at it. So yeah, and sometimes, and the services that already sell today, we use to sponsor the development of new services. So it's really about reinvesting, developing new capabilities, developing the bricks we will need for a more obvious business model change in 5 to 6 years, something like that.
So it's 2 o'clock, and we keep the time in a Swiss manner. Thank you very much. Thanks for the great contribution, theory and practice. Thank you for coming here. And before closing, so I remind that there is a research get-together for those who are interested. It is in a wellness center where you have the possibility also to exchange with Christopher TUCCI or Laurent Bianchini and to talk more. And I remind also the next seminar of the seminar series, which is scheduled on March 29. You will receive the information. But March 29, we have Professor Omar El-Savi, who is from Marshall School of Business in the University of Southern California. So, welcome, and thanks very much for being here. Thank you.